It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first visit to Gibraltar, and I came here at the invitation of the Jewish community. Last night we had a wonderful celebration of Israel's 70th independence. A massive birthday party for my country. Israel is 7 decades old, 70 years. Israelis have had to fight for their freedom, fight for their independence, and so we know to appreciate that freedom and independence. And what is the truth? Israel has not just survived, Israel has thrived. And our economy today is in a very good place. And so while here as the guest of the Jewish community, I was also trying to discover the details of the Israeli-Gibraltar economic relationships and see what I can do in government to try to make those relationships even stronger.
What have you thought of the Jewish community in Gibraltar?
Wonderful. I mean, first of all, Gibraltar has a Jewish community that goes back centuries. And it's a community that has contributed much to Gibraltar. But it's clear also that Gibraltar has been good to its Jews. It's been both ways. And amazing fact, there's never been a situation where a synagogue has been attacked, Jews have been attacked. This is a country, a society that has always been very tolerant and open. Some of your neighbors could learn from Gibraltar on this.
So what's your opinion of the ROC's links with Israel? We have, of course, some great business links. I can see the Israeli Chamber of Commerce is present here today. And of course, the Gibraltarian Deputy Mayor in Jerusalem.
We've got good ties, business to business, culture, at all levels. And that's good. Ultimately, we're on the very eastern end of the Mediterranean. You're on the very western end of the Mediterranean. And, by expanding the business links between Gibraltar and Israel, we're hoping to make both our economies stronger.
We recently hosted the Board of Deputies of British Jews here in Gibraltar, and of course during their visit, we discussed anti-Semitism, especially since they were meeting with Jeremy Corbyn at the time. What's your opinion? Do you feel that there is an issue of anti-Semitism in Britain?
I think anti-Semitism is an issue in many countries. After the terrible years of the Second World War and the Holocaust, many people thought anti-Semitism was finally going to be put on the dustbin of history where it deserves to be placed. People thought that humanity maybe had finally learned its lesson. But we see that that's not true. And we see that anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head in Europe, in Western Europe too, in France, in Belgium, and in Britain. And it's incumbent, I think, on all responsible leaders to unequivocally condemn it and to stamp it out.
And what effect does perhaps people voting more right-wing have on this, things perhaps like even Brexit?
The truth is you see anti-Semitism on the far right, you see anti-Semitism on the far left, and there can be no tolerance for anti-Semitism anywhere.
Would you say that perhaps anti-Zionism is more widespread because it's not such a deliberate prejudice, but people feeling that they're taking sides in the conflict?
Can I say the following? If someone wants to criticize the policies of the Israeli government, I might not like it, but that's legitimate. I mean, in Israel we have a very vibrant democracy, and we'll have very, very fierce debates on all the different policy issues. But when you're not talking about criticizing or discussing Israeli policy, when you're talking about demonizing the Jewish state, when you use
the Israeli state.
But because it's a Jewish state. I'll ask you a question. If I go to Scotland, and as an Israeli ambassador I go to Scotland, and there's a university professor in Scotland who's never called for a boycott of one of the many dictatorships in the Middle East, but has called for a boycott of the only democracy in the Middle East. Something about the Jewish state's very existence he finds morally apprehensive, yes? He can't, what's that all about?
Well, we've spoken of the 70th anniversary, and we've seen anti-Zionist Jews marching in New York only last month, claiming that it changes Judaism from a religion to nationalism.
Let's be clear. If you say that the Jewish people are not entitled to national self-determination, if you say the Jewish state alone needs to be destroyed, it means you're holding the Jewish people to a standard you hold no one else to. And that raises a larger question, does it not?
Before we move on to the situation with Iran, increased tensions in Israel, we've mentioned the 70th anniversary of the state, the opening of a US embassy as well in Jerusalem, and Palestinians marking the Nakba, or their displacement. Is this tension palpable, would you say?
Well, there's a certain amount of tension at the moment. I believe we'll get through it. And the American decision to move their embassy to Jerusalem is a very important decision. And others are following. We're seeing nations in Central America, and we're seeing countries in Europe. And I believe moving embassies to Jerusalem is both just and good politics. It's just because Jerusalem is our capital and has been for centuries. It's where the Israeli parliament is, the Israeli prime minister's office, the Israeli president's office, our Supreme Court. It is our capital, and to not recognize that is to ignore reality. But it's also good for peace, because there will be no peace without Jerusalem being Israel's capital, and it's important to base peace on reality. And by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, you're sending an important message to those extremists on the other side who think somehow the Jews are going to be thrown out of Jerusalem. We're not going to be thrown out of Jerusalem. Accept reality. Jerusalem is our capital.
Personally, I would imagine that having worked in Washington will serve you well now, just to sort of understand that American way of thinking.
I was 5 years at our embassy in Washington, D.C., and that was indeed an important professional experience.
Well, things are changing by the minute. We don't know, as we conduct this interview, we don't know what President Trump is going to do, whether he's going to introduce sanctions, whether he's going to delay pulling out of the deal, whether he's going to pull out of the deal. Mr. Netanyahu has said the deal is built on lies. Emily Thornberry asked all media to ask you this morning, and you've been asked this morning, what is the alternative?
The important thing is not the deal. The deal is just a piece of paper. The important thing is the goal. And the goal must be to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. For Israel, that's a matter of life and death. For the region, it's crucial. For the peace of the world, it's significant. We have to prevent that terrible regime in Iran from achieving nuclear weapons. That's the bottom line.
You saw the Israel-Jordan peace treaty develop. How different is perhaps this situation? How much more difficult? You have what appear to be three red lines: the sunset clause, ballistic missiles, and mechanisms stringent enough for Israel to accept.
Well, let's be clear. You raise all the right issues. Number one, the problem with the deal as it was signed is there's an automatic sunset clause, which means in a few short years, all the restrictions on Iranian nuclear enrichment are lifted. And so the Iranians can legally, with the stamp of approval from the international community, start to enrich uranium at industrial levels. So you won't be talking about one or two Iranian nuclear weapons, you could be talking about a whole Iranian nuclear arsenal. That's not good for anyone. The second issue you raise is, of course, the issue of ballistic missiles. Iran is free under the deal to build a whole armory of of ballistic missiles, and they've already been working to expand the range of those missiles. Now, those missiles are dangerous, and those missiles are planned to be with nuclear warheads. And finally, the issue of inspections. You can't have a situation where Iran can refuse inspections, where Iran has to be given notice ahead of inspections, that Iran can say this site is off limits to inspections. So all these issues have to be dealt with in a very serious way.
You say you're committed to peace with the Arab world. We had the BBC Middle East correspondent this morning using the phrase sliding into war. Would you say this is realistic?
We don't want conflict. We don't want bloodshed. We will, we'll see our own people pay a price. But it's very dangerous what Iran is doing. And specifically, we're watching what Iran is doing in Syria. The terrible regime of Bashar al-Assad would have fallen if not for Iranian help. And now that the Iranians feel from their perspective that Assad is their man and he's coming out on top of the terrible bloody civil war in Syria, they say it's now payback time. They want a dividend on their investment in this dictator. And so they want to build a formidable military presence in Syria from which they can attack us. And Israel can't allow that to happen.